There's a strange kind of silence that settles over a building after midnight. The kind that doesn't just fill the space, but presses against your chest, waiting for you to make the next sound. For most people, that silence is nothing. But for those of us who've ever worked security, it's the loudest thing in the world. I've been the only soul awake in places where every hallway is too still, every camera feed too empty, and every creak in the walls feels like a whispered warning. People think security work is boring, endless hours of routine, patrols, and paperwork. But they don't understand what happens when the night doesn't go according to plan, when you're the last line between the outside world and what's supposed to be safe, and the dark decides it wants in. It always starts the same way, nothing out of the ordinary. A night shift in a remote government building miles from the nearest road. A quiet office tower in New Jersey, where only the hum of the fluorescent lights keeps you company. A small medical clinic, empty but for the ticking of a wall clock and the glow of the elevator buttons. And then, something shifts. A figure on the edge of a camera feed where no one should be. A door left open that you know you locked. A security code entered by someone who shouldn't even know it. At first you try to rationalize it. Maybe it's a glitch. Maybe it's the cleaning crew. Maybe it's your mind playing tricks on you because it's 3 a.m. and you're half asleep. But deep down, you know better. There's a certain feeling you get in your gut. A sharp electric instinct that says you're not alone anymore. I've seen what happens when that feeling is right. I've stood in pitch black stairwells listening to footsteps that don't belong to me. I've watched figures move just out of frame, only to vanish when I check in person. I've felt the cold breath of fear when the power dies, and every ounce of safety disappears with it. And worst of all, I've looked into the darkness and realized that whatever's inside, whoever's inside, doesn't want to leave quietly. You learn quickly that there are 2 kinds of fear in this job. The first is the fear of the unknown, the question of what might be out there. The second is much worse, the fear of knowing that something is out there, and it's already inside. It's watching, waiting, testing how far it can go before you notice. Sometimes, it's a stranger who's planned this moment for weeks. Other times, it's someone who knows the building better than you do. And sometimes, it's neither. It's something that slips past locked doors and camera feeds as if the rules don't apply. Every guard has a story they don't like, to tell the one that crawled under their skin and never left. Some involve intruders who vanish into thin air. Others, footprints that lead nowhere. And some stories end with the sound of heavy boots sprinting behind you in an empty building that was supposed to be secure. The following stories aren't urban legends. They aren't the exaggerations you hear around a late-night shift briefing. They are real accounts told by the people who lived them of nights that should have been ordinary, but turned into something far more terrifying. Nights when routine patrols became fights for survival. Nights when silence was broken by footsteps that shouldn't exist. Nights that prove the scariest part of working security isn't what's outside the building. It's what's already inside and how close it's standing behind you before you ever realize you're not alone. So if you've ever felt that instinct, that sudden prickling at the back of your neck when you're sure someone's watching you, don't brush it off. Because in the stories you're about to hear, that instinct is the only thing that stood between life and death. I'd been doing this job long enough to believe I'd seen everything. 6 years in security, 6 years of night shifts, false alarms, flickering cameras, and endless empty halls. But nothing prepared me for that building. It was a government facility, though nobody ever told us exactly what went on inside. All I knew was that it was massive, 6 stories tall, surrounded by a 10-foot steel fence topped with barbed wire, isolated in the middle of miles of woods. There was only one way in or out. A single narrow road that wound 3 miles from the main highway before disappearing into the trees. It was the kind of place most people would never even know existed. By the time my company took the contract, I had seniority. I could choose my shifts. Normally, I worked mornings or evenings and left the graveyard hours to the newer guys. But we couldn't keep anyone on the overnight weekend shift. Too boring, they said. Too isolated, too quiet. And I needed the money. A new apartment was waiting for me, and the overtime pay would cover the deposit. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to fill in on weekend nights. The first 2 weekends were uneventful, boring even. I spent the nights alone in the control room on the top floor, surrounded by banks of monitors showing every hallway and exterior angle of the building. It was lonely work, just me, the hum of the air conditioning and the glow of the screens. But on the third weekend, the night changed. It was just past 2 a.m. A violent thunderstorm had rolled in, hammering the windows and shaking the building with every rumble of thunder. I sat in the dark control room, half watching a movie on my phone while idly playing a game on my old Game Boy, trying to stay awake. I stood to stretch my legs, walked over to the window, and peeked through the blinds into the pitch-black parking lot below. The rain was relentless, sweeping across the asphalt in sheets. Branches snapped in the wind, and bits of debris tumbled against the fence line. And then, for just a moment, a flash of lightning tore through the clouds and lit up the tree line beyond the fence. That's when I saw it. A figure darting from one tree to another. Quick, low, human. I froze. My breath caught somewhere in my throat as I stared into the darkness, waiting for another flash to reveal it again. But the next burst of light showed nothing, just empty woods swaying in the storm. Maybe it was a trick of the light, I told myself. Maybe I was tired. I grabbed an energy drink from the vending machine down the hall, downed it in one swallow, and returned to my post. But as soon as I sat down, I noticed something wrong. One of the camera feeds had gone dark. It was the rear lot camera, the one overlooking the stretch of fence where I'd seen the movement. My stomach tightened. I moved to the window again and peered out. The camera was dangling from its wires, swinging uselessly in the wind. The storm must have knocked it loose, right? I tried to convince myself that was all it was, but the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine told me otherwise. A few minutes later, the silence shattered with a soft beep, the sound the system makes when someone accesses a secured door. I glanced at the monitor. The entry point was the rear service door, right by the broken camera. The indicator flashed green. Whoever was out there had the code. They were inside. My pulse began to race. It wasn't another guard, I would have been notified. And it wasn't a worker. No one was scheduled to be here. I reached for the landline on my desk. There was no dial tone. My cell phone showed no signal. The storm had knocked out the reception. The building was suddenly much too quiet. I stepped into the hallway, holding my breath, hoping I could catch a bar of signal if I moved closer to the stairwell. That's when everything went black. The lights, the monitors, all of it. The power had been cut. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp. Whoever had entered the building knew what they were doing. And now, they had every advantage. I decided to make for the lobby, the only exit, and run for my truck. The stairwell door groaned as I pushed it open, revealing a shaft of darkness stretching down into nothing. I moved quietly, every footstep deliberate, using the shadows to conceal my movements. Halfway down, I heard a door creaking open below me. Then, footsteps, slow, heavy, coming up the stairs. I froze. My training told me to draw my weapon, but my hands wouldn't move. I wasn't ready for this. Not really. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I turned and started back up the stairs as quietly as I could, heading for the roof access hatch above the 6th floor. My plan was to climb up the maintenance ladder just below the hatch and hide in the darkness, silent and still. But as I turned, my gun scraped against the metal railing with a loud clang. The footsteps stopped. Then, boom, 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 they came pounding up the steps, fast and furious. I bolted, sprinting up the stairwell. At the landing, I threw the 6th floor door open hard, letting it slam behind me, and kept running for the ladder. Maybe, I thought, it would distract whoever was chasing me into thinking I'd gone through. Seconds later, the stairwell door burst open, but the footsteps didn't come my way. They ran into the hallway. My plan had worked. I dropped down from the ladder, a 10-foot fall that rattled my bones, and sprinted down the stairs. The footsteps started again behind me, pounding in pursuit. We were both running flat out now, a desperate race between hunter and prey. I reached the lobby first. Behind me, I heard a sudden crash and a cry of pain. Maybe he had slipped. Maybe he had fallen. I didn't care. I shoved through the front doors and ran into the storm, fumbling my keys and hitting the remote to unlock my truck. Wind howled. Rain blinded me. I dove into the driver's seat, slammed it into gear, and floored it. As the truck roared forward, I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, a figure dressed in black, face masked, sprinting out of the building after me. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. It wasn't until I hit the main road miles later that my phone finally picked up a signal. The police arrived 15 minutes after I called. We searched the entire building together. Nothing. Whoever had been there was gone. But they did find something, a fully loaded, unregistered handgun lying in the stairwell where he must have fallen. To this day, no one knows who he was or why he came. And when I think back to that night, the storm, the camera, the keypad, the footsteps, I realize something that chills me more than anything else. He was never trying to rob the place. He was hunting, and I was the only thing inside worth hunting. Most nights on the job were uneventful. I used to joke that security work was 90% boredom, 9% caffeine, and 1% pure adrenaline. The kind of adrenaline that only kicks in when something truly goes wrong. I worked the overnight shift in a medium-sized corporate office building in New Jersey. By midnight, the last employees were long gone. The lobby lights dimmed, and the only movement came from the faint reflections on the polished floor. My job was simple. Check the monitors, make a few rounds, log incidents if there were any. Most nights, there weren't. But there's a saying in this line of work. The night is quiet until it isn't. It started with a flicker of movement on one of the camera feeds, the one showing the underground parking garage. At that hour, the lot should have been empty. No one had 24-hour access except me, and I knew for a fact no one else was there. But there he was, a lone figure moving slowly between the parked cars. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe an employee had returned to pick up something they forgot. Maybe a janitor had been given temporary access. But something about the way he moved, it didn't feel right. He wasn't heading toward any particular vehicle. He wasn't carrying anything. He drifted through the shadows, weaving between cars like he was studying them, or worse, studying me. He wore a long, dark coat that looked a size too big. It hung off his shoulders in a way that made his movements seem sluggish and deliberate, almost theatrical. And the way he kept pausing, glancing over his shoulder, adjusting his stance, told me this wasn't just a guy who'd gotten lost. He was checking to see if he was being watched. I called my supervisor, explained what I was seeing. His advice was predictable. Stay put. Keep eyes on the cameras. Don't approach unless necessary. But sitting there, staring at the monitor, every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the elevator. The descent into the garage felt like it took forever. Each floor that passed groaned in the elevator shaft, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. My pulse matched it, one thud after another. When the doors slid open, silence swallowed me. The garage was empty. No footsteps, no movement, no sign of life. "Security!" I called out, my voice bouncing off concrete pillars and steel beams. Nothing, only the faint hum of the ventilation fans and the distant drip of water from a leaky pipe. I walked the rows slowly, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Every gap between cars felt like it might be hiding someone. Every shadow stretched too far, like it could move at any second. But after a full sweep, I found nothing. I convinced myself I'd imagined it a glitch on the feed, maybe. I returned to the lobby, trying to shake off the unease crawling up the back of my neck. Then I looked at the monitor again. He was there, standing in the same spot I had just searched, motionless, as if he'd never left. That's when the dread set in, because if he hadn't left, then he'd been watching me, hiding, waiting. I radioed my supervisor again, same instruction. Monitor the cameras. Don't engage. For the next 20 minutes, I watched the figure wander aimlessly toward the stairwell that led to the upper floors. His pace was slow, deliberate. He stopped often, turning to look behind him. And then, just before the stairwell door, he disappeared from view. I checked every other camera, hallways, elevators, even the rooftop. Nothing. No trace. It was as if he'd vanished into thin air. The silence returned. I sat frozen at the desk, staring at the empty feeds, my heart hammering. Then the elevator dinged. I turned toward the sound. The doors slid open. No one was inside, but on the glossy tile floor, leading out of the elevator and into the main lobby, were wet footprints, bare feet. The building's heating system was on full blast. It was below freezing outside. Whoever he was, he'd taken off his shoes to move silently, and now he was inside. I called the off-site patrol unit for backup, but they were at least 20 minutes away. I debated locking myself in the security office, but if he was already in the building, there were 100 places he could hide, and worse, 100 ways he could corner me. So I did the stupidest thing I could have done. I decided to do a sweep. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, flashlight in one hand, pepper spray in the other. The hallway stretched out before me, sterile and empty. Every office door I passed was locked, every light turned off. Halfway down the corridor, I noticed one door slightly ajar. It shouldn't have been. Every office was supposed to be secured at night. I pushed it open slowly, beams slicing through the dark interior. A computer slept on a desk. A chair was tucked neatly beneath it. No signs of movement. Nothing. I turned back into the hallway, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. Heavy, wet, uneven. Getting closer. My heart leapt into my throat. I spun the flashlight toward the sound and caught a glimpse, a flash of dark fabric disappearing behind the corner at the end of the hallway. He wasn't running. He was walking toward me. Calm, controlled, like he knew I was trapped. I bolted. The hallway blurred as I sprinted for the stairwell. My shoulder slammed into the handrail as I rounded the corner, but I barely felt it. Behind me, the footsteps grew faster, heavier, closer. The sound echoed in the narrow hall, filling the space between my heartbeat and the pounding in my head. I dove into the stairwell and slammed the door shut. The footsteps continued above me, then stopped, abruptly, and then there was silence. I sat there in the darkness, chest heaving, every muscle shaking. Maybe he'd left. Maybe he was waiting on the other side of the door. I didn't know. All I knew was that I wasn't alone. By the time the patrol arrived, I was pale, sweaty, trembling. We searched the building top to bottom. No sign of the intruder. No footprints. No evidence. And the worst part? The camera footage from the entire night, every moment he appeared on screen, was gone, corrupted. A blank stretch of static where his image should have been. I quit the job within a month. Even now, years later, I can't walk through a parking garage at night without looking over my shoulder. Every creak of a building makes my stomach knot, and every time I hear footsteps behind me, part of me expects to turn around and see him there again, barefoot, watching, waiting for the moment I forget he's real. It happened on my very first night as a mobile security guard. I'd been through the training videos, shadowed a few patrols, and thought I knew what to expect, a long night of driving from site to site, checking locks, filling out reports. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, certainly nothing like what was waiting for me at that clinic. The shift began just after midnight. My supervisor, an older guard named Rafi, was with me showing me the ropes, pointing out the usual problem spots. Most nights, he said, you'll just be bored. Maybe the odd false alarm. That's it. We were scheduled for a routine perimeter check at a small medical center on the outskirts of Mississauga. It was supposed to be the easiest stop of the night. No alarms, no disturbances, just a quick sweep before moving on. We pulled into the lot around 1:15 a.m. The rain had stopped and the night was cold and silent. But the moment we stepped out of the vehicle, something felt wrong. For one, the underground garage door was wide open. It was supposed to stay locked after hours. And then there was the front entrance. The glass door had been shattered inward. Rafi stopped, dead in his tracks. How the hell? If someone broke in, the alarm should have gone off. My stomach twisted. This was my first night, and we were already walking into a crime scene. We moved cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness as we stepped inside. The lobby was empty. No sign of forced entry beyond the broken door. But then, Rafi's voice cut through the silence. "Look." I followed his gaze toward the far end of the hall. The elevator was moving. The floor indicator blinked as it climbed. G, 1, 2, 3, and then stopped on 4. "Someone's here," he muttered, gripping his baton tighter. The thought made my chest tighten. Every horror story I'd ever heard about security work came rushing back all at once. Armed intruders, traps, ambushes. My heartbeat was pounding in my ears by the time we stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. The ride up felt like forever. I stared at the glowing floor numbers, wondering what would be waiting when the doors opened. Was someone going to charge at us? Were we about to walk into an armed robbery in progress? The doors slid open to darkness. The hallway stretched out before us, long and empty. The overhead lights were off, the offices sealed behind closed doors. We flipped our flashlights on and started clearing the floor, one room at a time. "Stick with me," Rafi whispered. Even his voice was shaking. "If anyone's up here, we'll corner them." But there was no one. Not a shadow, not a sound. Then thump, thump, thump. Footsteps. Coming from the stairwell. Going down. We hurried toward the door, ready to pursue whoever it was, but before we could reach it, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Not even an echo. Rafi lifted his radio. "Dispatch, this is A4. Call C25. We need immediate backup. Be advised, someone is inside the building, possibly armed, possibly waiting to ambush us." Dispatch told us to hold our position until reinforcements arrived. That was easier said than done. I'd never seen Rafi look so uneasy. The man who was supposed to be training me, my safety net, was sweating, pacing, glancing over his shoulder. "Bro," I whispered, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Backup's on the way. We're gonna be fine." But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it. We couldn't just bolt for the exit. Whoever was inside was somewhere below us, possibly near the front doors. If we took the elevator, they might hear it. If we used the stairs, we could walk right into a trap. Every option felt like the wrong one. 15 minutes crawled by like an hour before we finally heard the front door open again. "Security," a voice called out. It was our senior supervisor. Rafi radioed back, warning him someone was still inside. 3 of us swept the building together, floor by floor. Nothing. The top level was empty. So was the 3rd. So was the 2nd. But as we started down the final flight toward the ground floor, a sound made all 3 of us stop. The front door slammed. Then came the unmistakable rhythm of running footsteps outside. We rushed down the remaining stairs, bursting through the lobby doors into the night. The street was empty. Whoever had been there was gone. We searched the perimeter. We checked the garage. We combed the nearby alleyways and parking lot. There was no trace, no footprints, no discarded tools, nothing. It was as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. I stood there under the cold streetlight, staring at the shattered entrance, trying to make sense of it all. Someone had been inside. That much was certain. They'd broken in without triggering the alarm. They'd ridden the elevator to the top floor and walked down the stairs without leaving a single clue. They'd waited, silently, in the dark for nearly 20 minutes, then slipped away. The second help arrived. Either they had one hell of a hiding spot, Rafi muttered, or this place is haunted. I didn't laugh. I couldn't. The words echoed in my head as we sealed the building back up and filed the incident report. Haunted. That was exactly how it felt, like we hadn't just been dealing with a trespasser, but with something that wanted to be seen just long enough to make us question ourselves. I couldn't stop thinking about it on the ride back to HQ. The elevator moving on its own, the footsteps that stopped right before the door, the total lack of evidence. And the worst part? I'd be back there in a few nights alone this time. My training shift would be over, and the route would be mine. I've worked dozens of patrols since that night. Office buildings, warehouses, construction sites. But that medical clinic still sticks with me. Every creak of a stairwell, every echoing footstep in an empty hall brings me right back to that night, the night we weren't alone, even though the building swore we were. I'll never know who was in there or why, but I do know one thing with absolute certainty. They were watching us long before we ever realized we were watching them. Every security guard I've ever known has one story they don't like to talk about, the one that keeps them awake long after their shift ends. The story that plays on a loop when they walk down a dark hallway alone or glance up at a camera feed that should be empty. For me, it's all three of these nights. The figure that darted through the storm outside a government building and somehow got inside. The barefoot man who slipped past every locked door and erased his own image from the cameras. The intruder who vanished from a clinic without leaving a single trace behind. Each story started the same way. A job, a routine, a night like any other. And each one ended with the same chilling realization that safety is just an illusion. That the walls, the locks, the fences we put our trust in are only as strong as the things trying to get past them. And sometimes, those things aren't interested in money or sabotage or revenge. Sometimes, they're interested in you. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who've never done this job. It isn't the moments when you see the threat that haunt you. It's the moments when you don't. It's the thought that maybe someone was there, watching, waiting, standing just out of frame. It's the sound of footsteps echoing behind you when you're sure you're alone. It's the cold certainty that whoever or whatever was inside might still be out there, looking for another way in. I think that's why these stories never really end. Sure, they wrap up on paper. Police reports are filed, security protocols updated, new cameras installed. But the unanswered questions linger. Who was that masked man? And why was he there? How did that barefoot figure vanish from a sealed building? What did the intruder in the clinic want, and was it their first time inside? We'll probably never know. And maybe that's the point, because horror doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks calmly through a secure door, or waits in the stairwell just out of sight. Sometimes it wears ordinary clothes and bare feet, or carries nothing but silence and patience. And when it does, the story doesn't end when you clock out. It follows you home. It sits quietly in the back of your mind. It teaches you that peace of mind isn't the absence of danger, it's the belief that you'll see it coming next time. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: you rarely do. So the next time you find yourself walking alone through a dark parking garage, or locking up an empty building long after everyone's gone, pause for a moment. Listen, look around, and trust that strange electric instinct that tells you something isn't right. Because the scariest stories are never the ones that end with an answer. They're the ones that leave you wondering whether the story is over, or if it's just waiting for the right moment to begin again. And if tonight, as you're drifting off to sleep, you suddenly remember the sound of footsteps that weren't yours, or the image of someone standing just beyond the edge of the light, ask yourself one question before you turn off the lights. What if they were never really gone?